Welcome, folks, to Twilight Apprentice on YouTube. Today, we're going to do a little live stream. Just got one article I want to talk about. Charlie Cox did an interview. Netflix Daredevil's star Charlie Cox did an interview with the Hollywood Reporter. Going to pull that up in a second and talk about it. He shares some thoughts about Daredevil and the character's potential appearance in the MCU. Share some his thoughts on that happen to echo mine. I've talked about this before. I'm going to talk about it again, and I'm going to keep talking about it until hopefully the character is safe or saved, at least in my opinion. So going to do that. Talk about comic book stuff. I talk about superhero stuff. I talk about entertainment, collectibles, kind of whatever grabs my fancy that day. Talk about gaming stuff every once in a while. Today we're talking Daredevil, my favorite comic book character. I'm not a huge follower of a lot of comic book superheroes, but I do love me some Daredevil. So let's look at this article. This is from the Hollywood Reporter. And Charlie Cox calls speculative Daredevil return a double-edged sword. And I do too. Marvel fans want the actor back. Some of them. Marvel fans want the actor back in the superhero role. He made his own for 3 seasons on the Netflix series. Yeah, if we could get more of that Netflix series, sign me up for that. I'll be the first in line. I'll camp out in the parking lot waiting for that to open. But if it's in the MCU, man, not right now. So yeah, let's read this article. Starts out with a kapow. Look at that. Charlie Cox knows Marvel fans want him back as Daredevil in some fashion, but he cautions that such a situation could be not so great. During a recent interview with Jessica Shaw on Sirius XM. Okay, so this is the Hollywood Reporter reporting on a Sirius XM interview. I'll try to update the show notes to reflect the original interview, but there's a video of it. I watched the video. We'll talk about that in a second. So yeah, during a recent interview with Jessica Shaw on Sirius XM, the actor said there is a lot of speculation among fans whether he will reprise the role of the blind superhero post the beloved Netflix series. He admits that playing Matt Murdock, aka Daredevil, once more is not an unattractive thought. He was phenomenal as Daredevil. I'm sure he would be excited to do it again if the show and the writing was as strong as it was on Netflix. He's quoted as saying, quote, "What happens in the comics is a writer and an artist will team up for a run of a comic. They'll do 10 issues, 20 issues," Cox said. "If there's an opportunity for me to come back as Daredevil, whatever that would look like, I imagine it would be a reimagining of the character and the show. If they choose me to do it, there are going to be some elements that are, of course, the same. Or they might choose somebody else and reboot it all over again." Cox starred in the Drew Goddard-created Netflix series that ran 3 seasons from 2015 to 2018 for a total of 39 episodes. Netflix canceled the series. Marvel pulled the rights back, so Netflix had to cancel the series, but Netflix canceled the series in November 2018. Fans were outraged. A lot of fans were upset with Netflix for not doing it, but it was Disney and Marvel that pulled the rights back and refused to let Netflix go on. So anyway, fans were outraged. Some of that outrage was misplaced. Excuse me. Although those same fans want him back as Daredevil in a new series or even to join the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Cox noted that the situation could be a double-edged sword. It's quoting again, "You've got to be careful what you wish for," he said. "You come back and it's not as good, or it doesn't quite work, or it's just too much time has passed. It doesn't quite come together in the same way. You don't want to taint what you've already got. If we never come back, you've got these 3 great seasons, and our 3rd season was our best reviewed. So trajectory was up. I'm tremendously proud and grateful for what we have." It says watch the full interview below. I have. There is more in the interview. It's like a 10-minute video, um, mostly of Charlie Cox talking. The questions are pretty at the beginning are pretty open ended, and follow ups just prompt him to keep talking. So it's mostly Charlie Cox talking about his experience as Daredevil and his thoughts on the potential for return, what that might look like for him, what that might look like for the character. Worth a watch if you're super interested in Daredevil. But this Hollywood Reporter article pulls most of the salient points for the potential for return, what that might look like. Let's put this image back up here. Let's just make that big. Oh yeah. Show us some Daredevil. Love this show. Love this show. If you liked Netflix Daredevil, highly recommend finding the DVDs and buying them. If you're a huge fan of a media property and it's on a streaming service or digital somewhere, get physical copies because property owners can and have gone in and re-edited, reimagined certain parts of classic favorites, fan favorites. Really notable version of that is some of the digital changes that have been made to the original Star Wars trilogy of movies. A lot of CG effects added, entire scenes, in fact, added after the fact. Not necessarily bad, but if you're a huge fan of the original property, it's good to own those in physical media. Just saying. But yeah, man, I love the show. I would say that I was a very lukewarm superhero fan. Like I would go see Batman movies. I didn't see all of them. Like I saw the Michael Keaton Batman movies. The Val Kilmer one maybe chased me away. I don't even know if I saw the Clooney one. The Ben Affleck Daredevil movie was pretty bad. Yeah, superhero movies were hit or miss. I think probably, well, even the Sam Raimi Spider-Man stuff, that third one was pretty bad. But those movies started coming out at a time where we didn't have a lot of good science fiction and fantasy stuff. There were some, but there certainly wasn't the abundance of that we have now. And it was probably just because those movies were hard to make, right? Technology and special effects and all has come along to the point where it's more realistic to make those types of movies. There were people doing science fiction and fantasy really, really good. Shows like Farscape did unbelievably impressive stuff with puppets. If just looking at Farscape, the characters of Rigel and Pilot, huge emotional impact in those shows. Love those characters in those shows. Entirely puppetry, and the first time you watch one of those episodes, you can totally see like, oh yeah, this is a puppet. But like once you're 3, 4, 5 episodes into the series, you no longer see the puppet anymore. You see the character because they're well-written characters. They're crafted well, they're performed well, and they're super consistent. Doesn't mean they can't grow, but they grow in expected ways or in surprising ways that make sense with their experiences and the character that as you've experienced them. So yeah, in a nutshell, it's good writing. But there wasn't a lot of that when like the first X-Men movie started coming out and the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man stuff started coming out. There wasn't a lot of other science fiction fantasy that was really, high budget, done well. So I think it brought a lot of people closer to superheroes than maybe they'd been in the past, even if, they'd never read a comic in their life. But what really brought superheroes kind of as a genre rather than a one-off indulgence to my attention, and I think to a lot of people's attention, was the Netflix Daredevil show. It was so well done. Um, it took a comic book property that I think many adults would view kind of as, oh, comic books, they're for kids or for young people. And it told a very grounded adult story, um, with incredibly consistent characterizations and meaningful relationships, and told a a story about good standing up to evil, right? Um, a lone man standing up against tyrannical, overwhelming force. It was a lot of fun. It was just a lot of fun. So it was the first time that for me, um, I was like, you know what? I think I'm just a superhero fan. I'd always liked the Daredevil character. It was just randomly one of the few characters that I'd read. I read a bunch of the Frank Miller stuff when I was in, I think, mostly early college, maybe late high school. But it was one of the few superheroes that I'd actually read comics for. Superheroes, some of the Green Arrow stuff, Watchmen, things like that. And they tended to be more adult, more grim, darker, very late 80s, early 90s kind of superhero deconstruction type stuff. That was just Frank Miller's heyday. And so I kind of had an affinity for the character going in, and a little bit of knowledge about the character and what he was all about. But anyway, gushing enough about that show. It was fantastic. For me, I don't want that sullied by modern day MCU. And I think Charlie Cox is immediately correct, abundantly correct, let me zoom this back out, when he says, you've got to be careful what you wish for. You come back and it's not as good, or it doesn't quite work, or too much time has passed. So let's take those in reverse order. Has too much time passed? That first one came out in 2015. It's 2021, nearly 2022. Let's go in good faith and say that he's not in the new Spider-Man movie. Anything that he's going to be in maybe hasn't started production yet. Maybe he shows up in She-Hulk. Maybe he's in Moon Knight. Who knows? But let's just assume that he's either just recently filmed this or hasn't yet, and they'll start in 2022. He's 7-8 years older than when he was in production for that first season. Is that too much time to have passed? Well, not for good storytelling, right? You can tell good stories at any point. So not in that regard. Has too much time passed to assemble the same cast and crew? Yeah, probably other people have moved on to other things. So even if they got Charlie Cox back, would they be able to get Vincent D'Onofrio? And I know there's rumors about him coming back. Would they be able to get Deborah Ann Wool? Would they recast her character in the show? Would they even want that character, or would they gender swap characters? Like, it's unrealistic at this point, having had this much time passed and a whole new team doing it, that you would get the same cast and crew and have that same feel, that same experience. So in that way, yeah, maybe too much time has passed. Physically for Charlie Cox, well, it's kind of up to him. I don't know how old he is. Let's look it up. Probably not. Like, he seems like a really hardworking actor. How old is Charlie Cox? Let's see. He's 38. So I'm a long way from 38. But I know when I was in my 30s, I was still capable of getting into the best shape of my life. It was harder, but that was on the table. And he seems like a really hard worker. So yeah, he could probably pull it off physically. Deeper into his 40s, it just gets harder. Like, even if you can keep the strength up and stay lean, you're not as flexible and you're not as fast. It's just harder. Certainly there's people that can do it, and maybe he's more genetically blessed than some other people. So maybe he could pull it off. So has too much time passed? In some ways, yeah. Yes, too much time has. Could they make it work? Yeah. If it was good writing, they could. And that's then the second point. You come back and it's not as good, or it doesn't quite work, or too much time has passed. I think the most likely scenario, if they were to reintroduce Charlie Cox, is it wouldn't quite work. And there's two perspectives there. If you never watched the Netflix Daredevil stuff and you're just experiencing Daredevil for the first time, Charlie Cox does him really well. So for a new MCU only or a new viewer, it might really work fantastically for them. But I think for fans of the show, of the Netflix show, and that's what Disney and that's what Marvel would be capitalizing on by recasting Cox, is they know he can do it, but they would want that nostalgia bait to swing in front of really kind of a rabid fan base to come back and, like, you love Daredevil on Netflix, wait till you see him in whatever the next Marvel property is going to be. And I think for them, that character is treated like Disney has treated a lot of other legacy characters. It wouldn't quite work, and it it may be disastrous for them. But again, for new fans, Charlie Cox plays a really good Daredevil. They might be fine with it. And then, so it's this first point, and I think I saved this one for last because I think this is where we're going. I think it just would not be as good. I don't think modern day Marvel really knows what it's supposed to be doing. The last few, all of the Disney Plus shows, and I got to give them a little bit of a break here. I know we've been in a global pandemic, and in multiple aspects of my life, things have been kind of upended, and haven't gone quite as I'd planned. Right, so give them. I give Marvel a little bit of slack in that. I know some of their productions didn't quite flow the way that they anticipated, but that's more like results in delays, or you have to scale back on the size of the cast, or there's some grand thing you wanted to do you couldn't do because some actor or actress is in Europe and not available or whatever. It's those kinds of things. Daredevil's appearance in the MCU being, used Charlie Cox's word here, it's not as good. I think that has to do with the decision making, like the storytelling choices and the writing that we've seen out of Marvel lately. Just speaking very frankly, I think we would be more likely to see I should say, I think it is less likely that we would see a Daredevil story with the man without fear rising above circumstances and situations that would put the rest of us in the dirt to stand up to a villain like Kingpin sullying his city. I think we're less likely to see that story than we are to see a despondent, broken Matt Murdock foisting the mantle of his Daredevil persona onto Elektra so he can, pursue a bi-curious relationship with Frank Castle or something. That just seems to be more the type of story that we're likely to get out of Marvel, whether it be Marvel Comics or their Disney Plus shows or their cinematic productions. And I'll just speak for myself. For me as a fan, that is not going to flow naturally with those 3 seasons of Daredevil, plus his appearances in, or even references to the other Netflix Marvel characters. It's just not going to be part of that universe, and that's going to be a disappointment. Maybe that'll change. Maybe in 2 or 3 years, we'll still be able to say, this has too much time passed in. Maybe Charlie Cox will still be able to pull off the character. And it'll be cool to finally get Daredevil, and we'll have Charlie Cox, and it'll be like, oh, that's awesome because I remember him from back in the day. Or maybe it'll be somebody new and we'll love that actor as well. But Disney is interested in writing them like we have known the character for literal decades, and not kind of the way they're currently writing their heroes, which are not particularly heroic in the last few things that I've seen. I pulled this up, and then I'll wrap this up. This is Daredevil season 1. Critically, 99% on Rotten Tomatoes, and a fan score, it's actually lower than I thought, 92% on Rotten Tomatoes. And Disney's Rotten Tomato scores seem to be, fairly well fortified, but this is a overwhelming critical and audience reception for this character, for this show. For it all came together perfectly, and we still have that. And Charlie Cox even points that out in this quote. And if you watch the video, he talks even a little bit more about that. If we never come back, you've got these 3 great seasons, and our 3rd season was our best reviewed. So the trajectory was up. Like, the show was full steam ahead, picking up momentum, and that's where they stopped. And that's a great place to end a story, is on an upswing like that. He's tremendously proud and grateful, and I'm tremendously grateful to have enjoyed that. And I'm perfectly content rewatching that. I would rather rewatch Daredevil from Netflix that I love than see the character trashed in a current day Marvel production. And the comparison I have for that is Black Widow. Like, I know there's been other Marvel stuff come out, but like Shang-Chi it's a new character. It's kind of an origin story. It's not as apples to apples as something like Black Widow, a beloved character. We've got history with her in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and she finally got the standalone film that I think most people believe she deserved half a decade ago. And to see what Marvel did with that. So this is a legacy character, like if you include the Netflix shows, a similar amount of screen time for Scarlett Johansson's Black Widow over kind of a similar time period, kind of the early teens to 2020 time period. And we saw what they did with that character in that movie with that story, and it's kind of disappointing. The 4-hour Mahler adventure, diving into that movie is fantastic. It was a much better watch than the movie, and it was because the storytelling was, in my opinion, it was so poor and so out of character for what we've seen from a lot of the other Marvel films, that it's really made me not only reconsider but firmly hope that they keep their hands off Daredevil, like stay away from him. I don't have a lot of personal ties to the X-Men characters. Like, I love Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, and I've read enough Wolverine in actual comics to realize that he wasn't a totally accurate portrayal of that character. He's 6 foot something, and the actual character is short and stout, gruff and stout. So I know it wasn't like a totally accurate portrayal, but I'm not the hugest X-Men fan. Like, go mess with those characters. Disney has an interest in promoting their own characters. Do that. Don't take a beloved character with decades and decades of history that we already have good properties for, and give him the current day Marvel MCU treatment. I am not interested in that even existing. I would watch it. Darn you, Marvel. I would watch it just because it's Daredevil. But I have to be worried about how they would treat that character. And just the caliber and quality of their writing right now. It's not good. It's really disappointing. Maybe they'll turn things around with the Eternals. Reviews on that have been mixed so far. I don't see it, but they just delayed a bunch of stuff, and that probably has more to do with the potential worker strike in Hollywood than it does their actual productions. But they postponed Indiana Jones for a full year. So who knows what the reasons for that is. Harrison Ford got injured or something, so maybe that has something to do with it. But that dude ain't young. and he ain't getting any younger. So they got to feel a certain amount of pressure to move forward on that. It may be because that they finally learned their lesson from Luke Skywalker. Um, if just from a host of stories they've tried to tell recently that kind of just piss people off, that they need to, if they're going to do Indiana Jones again, they need to do that character with a great deal of respect, and they have to get their writing sorted out. They're writing some really really bad stories right now. I was going to wrap this up, but I'll talk about this too. I recently have been wondering, like, why am I not liking movies as much? I see movies and I'm just more likely to kind of pick them apart than I am to enjoy them. And and as a writer, as somebody who's studied a lot of storytelling, sometimes it's hard to step away from those lessons. And with 20 years of training on that, it's easy to pick apart tropes and to like identify. Um, Kind of storytelling cliches. And once you know them, it's hard not to see them, and they can kind of grate on you a little bit. So maybe it's that. So I went back and I watched some earlier movies. Um, I watched um, I watched Smokey and the Bandit. Right, that movie. I think that was made in the same year that the original Star Wars movie was made. I mean, that is going way back. And oh my lord, you would probably be crucified if you tried to make that. Everybody kind of talks about like Blazing Saddles or Tropic Thunder. Like, oh, you couldn't make that movie in today's environment. Uh, I don't think you could make a Burt Reynolds movie in current day, but it was fun, and the script was like, it's a dumb story, right? It's a couple guys trying to bootleg some beer from, I think, from Texas to Georgia or something. Like, it's kind of a cheesy, corny concept, but the script is smart, right? Whether or not the story is intelligent or not, the writing is tight, right? There's nothing in there that doesn't need to be there, and everything that is there is considered in its place and there for a reason, right? And it works really well. I watched Donner makes great movies anyway. I think everybody loves his Superman 2 is the best movie ever made, and I've heard people say that's the best superhero movie ever made. I like Donner films, but he did the Lethal Weapon movies. I went back and watched one of those, and again, problematic maybe from today's Twitter sensibilities, but it is a good script. It is a story well told, and I didn't find myself picking it apart like I have some current films. In fact, it was enough fun that I watched all four of them, and they were all good. The time certainly passed, right? When you watch the fourth Lethal Weapon movie, they don't do some of the things that they did. They don't say some of the words that they say in the first Lethal Weapon movie, because times changed, and some of the things they say in the first Lethal Weapon movie are directly offensive to certain groups. And these are groups that Hollywood kind of would rather have as an audience than target as an object for bullying. So, like, I get that. you can improve over time, both personally, but also as a company or an industry making a product, and they did that. But those movies were well crafted, tight scripted. They were well performed, and um, great cinematography, practical effects. Like, they actually had to. It's a lot of driving, right? Um, but they actually had to, like, do these things with stunt performers, so the stakes feel a little higher as a viewer than watching some obviously CG light show fest. But those movies were super fun. So if I have a point in bringing that aside up, it's that we already have, like Charlie Cox said, we have 3 amazing seasons of Daredevil, just like we have decades of good movies. Um, Are they perfect for today's audience? No, they probably weren't perfect for audiences when they were originally made. Um, I don't know why we need to expect perfection, but we can expect good storytelling in stories, right? Or at least we can hope for that and expect our media producers, our writers, to aspire to provide that. Um, and there are people doing that these days, right? Whether you like Zack Snyder personally or not, it was fun to see the Snyderverse, like an artist take their entire vision and fulfill it. Right? It was way better than the theatrical production of that. James Gunn, again, whether you like him or hate him individually, what he did with Suicide Squad was really fun. So in the genre fiction, superhero, science fiction, fantasy, there are people doing that. I've heard Dune is fantastic. I can't wait to see that. But the MCU, Marvel, they're not on that list right now. They are making movies that are more akin to the Ben Affleck Daredevil than they are to the Netflix Daredevil right now. They're making bad movies. They're making bad shows. And personally, I want them to stay away from Daredevil. So anyway, that's all I got for today. A bit of a rant, really. And I'm not specifically a ranter, but I'm capable of it, I guess. And pull back to me. But yeah, there you have it. Daredevil. And I will end with saying there are DVD sets of the Netflix stuff. If you're going to spend 30, 40 bucks on some superhero stuff in the rest of 2021, or maybe a Christmas gift for a superhero fan in your life, buy the Netflix Daredevil season DVDs. And maybe skip some of the Marvel stuff until they get themselves sorted out. That's all I got. Might be back with another stream later. Might do another unboxing. I've got a couple things in the can that I just need to do the video work on. So maybe I'll do that soon. Till then, bye.